Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we step quietly into the year 1271, push open the low wooden door of a medieval farmer's cottage, and discover what it actually feels like to call this small, smoky place home. The first thing you notice is not the furniture, it is the air. Smoke hangs beneath the roof like a thin grey veil, drifting lazily from the hearth and searching for whatever opening it can find. The smell is a mixture of burning wood, damp earth, wool, old straw, yesterday's supper, and perhaps an animal that has made a deeply personal decision to stand somewhere inconvenient. You duck beneath the doorway because the entrance is lower than you expect. A modern building inspector would have several concerns already, and you have been inside for roughly 3 seconds. The floor beneath your feet is hard-packed earth. It is uneven, slightly damp in places, and marked by countless footsteps. There are no polished boards waiting to creak romantically beneath your boots. There's no decorative stone fireplace glowing beside a comfortable chair. And, just to establish expectations early, you probably won't survive this lifestyle with your 21st century dignity completely intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me where you are listening from tonight and what time it is where you live. There is something pleasantly strange about imagining people lying awake in different corners of the world while we all squeeze ourselves into the same smoky cottage in medieval England. Now, dim the lights and move a little farther inside. Your eyes slowly adjust. The cottage is not large. Depending on the wealth of the household and the customs of the region, a farming family may live in one main room or in a modest structure divided into a few functional spaces in poorer rural homes. Much of daily life happens within a remarkably small area. Cooking happens here, eating happens here, repair work happens here, children play here, people argue here, people sleep here, and during unpleasant weather. Certain animals may become temporary roommates. Privacy, as you understand it, is not exactly thriving. The walls around you are rough and practical. Timber forms the basic framework, while woven branches may fill the spaces between the wooden supports. These woven panels are coated with a mixture of clay, mud, straw, and other fibrous material, creating what later generations commonly describe as wattle and daub. This method is not merely primitive improvisation. It uses materials that rural communities can often obtain locally, and when properly maintained, such walls can provide respectable protection from wind and weather. That is one important reality worth keeping in mind. Medieval farmers are not wandering around helplessly waiting for somebody in the future to invent sensible housing. Their homes are shaped by experience, available resources, local climate, inherited techniques, and the constant calculation of how much labor a family can realistically spare. Still, practical does not mean comfortable. You brush your fingers against the wall. The surface is irregular. Small cracks may appear as the material dries or shifts, and repairs are simply part of owning the place. A patch here, another layer there. Perhaps fresh material worked into a gap before winter, above you. The roof slopes steeply beneath thick thatch. Bundles of straw reeds overlap carefully, creating a surprisingly effective barrier against rain when the roof is well constructed. A good thatched roof can shed water efficiently, although it also demands maintenance. And fire remains an obvious concern when open flames are part of everyday life. You glance toward the hearth. Yes, open fire beneath a roof made partly from dried plant material. Sleep peacefully. The household around you is already moving. A woman crouches near the fire, adjusting a cooking pot. A child carries something toward the doorway, moving with the solemn importance of someone entrusted with a task that may involve either water or chicken feed. An older relative sits close to the wall, hands occupied with some small piece of work, a man prepares to leave for the fields. The image differs sharply from the neat medieval cottages sometimes presented in nostalgic paintings. Rural life is organized around labor, and almost every object inside the home is connected to work. A wooden chest stores clothing, cloth, food, or valuables. A bench offers seating. Simple pottery stands near the hearth. Tools lean against a wall. Bundles hang from pegs or rafters where smoke, dryness, and limited floor space make overhead storage useful. One curious detail found in discussions of medieval domestic life is just how creatively households use vertical space. Herbs, food, tools, baskets, clothing, and equipment can all end up suspended from walls or roof timbers. Your cottage may be small, but apparently the medieval solution to limited storage is the same one used in cramped apartments centuries later. Put things everywhere above your head. Scholars continue to discuss how representative surviving descriptions, excavated foundations, and later vernacular buildings really are when reconstructing the homes of ordinary 13th century farmers. Poor rural cottages leave fewer records than castles, monasteries, or manor houses, and timber, thatch, and earth disappear far more easily from the archaeological landscape than stone. So when you imagine this cottage in 1271, you're entering a world reconstructed from fragments. Post holes, floor surfaces, pottery, charred grain, animal bones, building traditions that survive in later structures, legal documents that occasionally reveal buildings, rents, obligations, and possessions. No medieval farmer has thoughtfully left you a complete inventory titled Things Inside My House, unfortunately including fleas. You have to rebuild the ordinary world piece by piece, and the ordinary world is exactly what makes this place interesting. Outside, history books may speak of kings, wars, taxation, noble families, disputes over land, and church politics. Inside this cottage, history feels smaller, a pot warming beside a fire, a child coughing in the smoke, cold air slipping through a badly repaired crack, mud drying on a pair of shoes, a loaf being divided carefully because nobody wastes food casually. The cottage is not merely shelter. It is workplace, kitchen, bedroom, storeroom, nursery, workshop, and social centre compressed beneath one roof. You stand near the doorway for another moment and listen. The fire pops softly. Someone shifts a wooden stool across the floor. A chicken complains outside with astonishing confidence. Wind brushes across the thatch, and slowly. The cottage begins to stop looking like a crude box made by people who lacked better ideas. Instead, you start to see what it really is. A carefully maintained machine for survival, built from soil, wood, straw, labour, habit, and generations of practical knowledge. Before long, you will begin examining those walls more closely, because almost every surface around you has been assembled from materials taken from the landscape just beyond the door. You move closer to the wall and begin to understand that the cottage is less a single object than a collection of materials gathered from the surrounding countryside, timber first. The heavier posts and beams provide the skeleton of the building, supporting the roof and giving the walls their basic shape. The wood is not necessarily smooth, straight, or carefully finished. It has been cut, shaped, fitted, and persuaded into service with hand tools, patience, and experience. You run your hand across one exposed beam. The surface is rough beneath your fingers. Tool marks remain visible. Nothing here has passed through a modern sawmill. Every piece represents human labour, from choosing the tree to cutting it, transporting it, trimming it, and fitting it into place. Even a small cottage quietly contains an enormous amount of work before anyone cooks a single meal inside it. Between the structural timbers, Thinner branches may be woven together into flexible panels. Hazel is especially useful in many parts of medieval England because it's straight. Manageable rods can be bent and interlaced. This woven framework becomes the wattle. Then comes the daub. Clay, mud, straw, chaff, hair, dung, or other fibrous material may be mixed together depending on local custom and available resources. The exact recipe is not fixed across medieval Europe. People use what works in their own landscape. The wet mixture is pressed over and into the woven branches, filling the gaps. Once dry, the wool becomes surprisingly solid. This is one of those moments when the phrase medieval mud hut becomes rather unfair. Properly made wattle and daub is not simply mud slapped randomly onto sticks. It is a building technique developed through long practical experience, and versions of it are used for centuries. The materials are cheap compared with dress stone, locally available, and repairable without requiring specialized masonry. Your household cannot order replacement panels from a warehouse. It does not need to. If part of the wall deteriorates, someone can gather materials, mix fresh daub, and repair the damaged section. There is something almost comforting about that. Almost. Then you notice the cracks, sun, rain, wind, frost, settling timbers, and daily wear all work patiently against the cottage. Maintenance never really ends. A wall is not something you construct once and forget about for the next 30 years. You patch it, you inspect it, you curse the weather quietly. Then you patch it again. Some walls might receive a lime-based coating or pale wash, depending on region and household resources. Such treatment can brighten an interior and offer additional protection to the surface. Do not imagine every rural cottage as permanently dark brown inside and out. Medieval buildings could possess more visual variety than popular depictions suggest, even if your own home remains decidedly practical rather than decorative. The roof above you deserves even more respect. Thatching requires skill. Bundles of straw, reeds, or other suitable vegetation must be arranged so rain travels downward across overlapping layers instead of leaking through them. The pitch of the roof helps water run away quickly from outside. A thick thatched roof gives the cottage its familiar rounded softness from inside. You see something less romantic. Dark rafters, bits of straw, dust, the occasional insect, perhaps a spider that has inherited more roof space than your entire family has floor space. A well-maintained thatch can last for years, although the ridge and exposed sections need periodic renewal. Local materials matter greatly. Water reed, long straw, and other plants perform differently, and construction traditions vary from place to place. One established feature of medieval rural architecture is exactly this regional dependence. Homes are shaped by whatever materials are easiest to obtain nearby. Timber-rich districts build differently from areas where stone lies close to the surface. Wetland communities may have excellent access to reeds. Other places depend heavily on straw produced through agriculture. The landscape becomes architecture. You can almost read geography through the cottage walls. Look beyond the doorway and you see fields, hedges, woodland, streams, and patches of rough ground. Much of what surrounds you has contributed something to the structure. Trees become frames, branches become wattle, earth becomes daub, crops provide straw, reeds become thatch, stone, where available, may strengthen foundations, hearths, or lower wall sections. Nothing travels farther than necessary because transport is slow and expensive. A peculiar detail sometimes discussed in vernacular building traditions is the presence of animal hair in plaster and daub mixtures. Hair can act as reinforcement, helping the material resist cracking. So if your medieval cottage wall contains a little cow hair or horse hair, this is not evidence that the builder lost control of the mixing process. It may be completely intentional. You begin looking at the wall, with slightly more respect, perhaps slightly less enthusiasm about touching it. The floor beneath you follows the same principle of local practicality. Packed earth may be repeatedly compressed by feet and household activity in some homes. Surfaces could be improved with clay or other materials. Rushes or straw might sometimes be spread across floors. Though the popular idea that medieval households simply allowed filthy layers of reeds to accumulate untouched for years is exaggerated. People sweep. They remove rubbish. They replace dirty material. They possess noses. This should not be a shocking revelation. Yet medieval people are often imagined as mysteriously indifferent to conditions that would annoy almost any human being. Historians and archaeologists still disagree over how frequently particular construction methods and floor treatments appeared among the poorest rural households, partly because such structures leave frustratingly incomplete evidence. A vanished wooden cottage may survive only as stains in soil, post holes, hearth remains, or subtle changes in ground level. The humbler the building, the easier it is for centuries to erase it. That makes your cottage strangely fragile in historical memory. A castle wall can remain standing for 800 years. Your wall can disappear into a field. Yet in 1271 this humble structure matters far more to you than any distant fortress. It keeps rain from your bedding. It blocks the worst wind. It gives you somewhere to cook. It stores the few possessions your household cannot afford to lose. It shelters children. It protects grain, clothing, tools, and perhaps livestock when conditions turn severe and every weakness becomes personal. A leaking roof is not an architectural curiosity. It means wet straw. A cracked wall is not archaeological evidence. It means cold air against your back at night. A rotten beam is not a picturesque feature. It means somebody must find timber and repair it before gravity becomes involved. You step outside for a moment and look back. The cottage sits low against the landscape, its materials blending naturally with the fields and hedges around it. There is no sharp separation between building and countryside. The countryside has simply been rearranged into shelter. Wood becomes walls. Earth becomes insulation, plants become roofing, labour binds everything together. Then a voice calls from inside, reminding you that admiring medieval construction is apparently not considered a valid excuse for avoiding chores. You duck beneath the doorway again. The moment you return, you become aware of how little space exists between one person and another. The walls may protect you from the weather, but they cannot protect you from your family. And in a one-room household, there is almost nowhere else to go. You step back into the cottage and immediately become aware of something that modern homes allow you to forget. Other people are everywhere, not necessarily in great numbers, but close enough that every movement, every cough, every muttered complaint, and every small domestic disagreement belongs to the whole room. There is no hallway leading to a private bedroom, no quiet study, no spare room where somebody can disappear after an argument and dramatically shut the door. If your household consists of parents, children, perhaps an elderly relative, and occasionally another dependent or worker, then much of life unfolds within the same enclosed space. You wake near one another, you eat near one another, you work near one another, you sleep near one another, and if somebody snores, everyone becomes a participant. The room changes function throughout the day rather than possessing one fixed purpose. In the morning, bedding may be rolled, folded, pushed aside, or rearranged to create working space. A bench that served as seating yesterday evening becomes a surface for sorting vegetables or repairing equipment. A chest used for storage may also serve as a seat. A stool moves wherever somebody needs it. Nothing is allowed the luxury of having only one job. The same is true of people. A child old enough to carry water may be asked to carry water. A child old enough to gather kindling may gather kindling. Someone tends the fire. Someone watches a younger child. Someone checks food stores. Someone repairs clothing. Someone handles tools near the doorway where the light is better. Household organization is less about a neat division between domestic life and labor than about fitting constant work into limited space. One firmly established feature of medieval rural society is that the household functions as an economic unit as well as a family unit. Work performed inside the home supports work performed outside it. Food preparation, textile work, tool maintenance, childcare, storage, brewing, dairying, and countless smaller tasks all contribute to survival. Your cottage is therefore not simply where you go after work, it is where a large amount of work happens. You look toward one corner. A woman sits with cloth in her lap, examining a worn area that needs mending. Fabric is too valuable to discard casually because of a tear. Clothing can be patched, altered, handed down, cut into smaller pieces, or repurposed until there is very little useful material left to surrender. Nearby, a child holds a wooden bowl. Another child is being told not to interfere with something near the hearth. This instruction appears to have been ignored. Certain aspects of family life, apparently, require no historical translation. The arrangement of sleeping spaces varies greatly according to wealth, region, and household structure. Some people may sleep on simple mattresses filled with straw or other plant material. Others might use pallets, benches, or more substantial wooden bedsteads if the family possesses them. You should not assume every peasant sleeps directly on bare earth, but you should also avoid imagining a beautifully carved four-poster bed waiting beside the hearth. For many farming households, bedding itself represents significant value. Blankets, linen, woolen coverings, and stuffed mattresses require materials and labour. They are maintained carefully because replacing them is not easy. At night, more than one person may share a bed or sleeping surface. This is practical. It saves space. It conserves warmth. It also guarantees that somebody's elbow will eventually become a diplomatic issue. Privacy has a different meaning in such an environment. That does not mean medieval people possess no desire for personal boundaries. Humans have always found ways to create temporary separation where possible. A hanging cloth, a piece of furniture, a curtained sleeping area, or simply an understood corner of the room can provide some sense of division. But the architectural possibilities are limited. Conversation is difficult to conceal. Illness cannot be hidden easily. A baby's crying belongs to everyone. Arguments happen within hearing distance. Personal habits become public knowledge, and moments that modern households might treat as private often occur within a community accustomed to much closer living. There is a small oddity here that's easy to overlook in crowded households. Furniture can act almost like movable architecture. A chest placed strategically, a hanging textile, or a bed positioned along a wall can create temporary zones inside a room without requiring permanent partitions. The cottage quietly rearranges itself according to need. Morning makes it a workplace. Mealtime makes it a dining space. Night turns it into a dormitory. Rainy weather can transform it into something dangerously close to a waiting room filled with irritated relatives. Scholars still debate how commonly poorer 13th century rural cottages were genuinely single-room structures versus divided internally with light partitions or separate service areas. Because archaeological remains often preserve foundations more clearly than interior arrangements. Documentary evidence can tell you that a building exists without explaining precisely where grandmother sleeps. So your experience depends partly on location and fortune. A slightly better off farmer might possess a longer house with separate areas. Another family may have an attached byre or additional outbuilding. A poorer household may compress nearly everything into one principal interior. But the central reality remains. Space is precious. Every corner matters. You begin noticing the social choreography required to make the room function. People learn one another's movements. Someone shifts aside before a pot is carried from the hearth. A child steps around a basket without looking. An older person keeps to the warmer part of the room. Tools are stored where they can be reached without blocking passage. People do not need to discuss every movement because repetition has turned routine into instinct. You are the awkward one. You stand in the wrong place, twice. The second time, somebody gives you the unmistakable medieval equivalent of, "Could you please stop being furniture?" You move closer to the wall. From here, you can observe how age influences position within the household. Young children remain close enough to be supervised but useful enough to perform small tasks. Older children carry greater responsibilities. Adults manage heavier work. Elderly family members may continue contributing through lighter domestic tasks, childcare, food preparation, craft skills, or knowledge accumulated through years of experience. The household is not simply a collection of individuals. It is a network of dependence. That dependence can be comforting. It can also be exhausting if someone becomes sick. Others absorb the missing labor. If one person is injured, every routine shifts. If a child is too young to work, somebody must watch that child while still completing other duties. Modern ideas of having time entirely to yourself would feel rather luxurious here. Even quiet moments are shared. As evening approaches, you sit near the wall while conversation moves softly around the room. Nobody needs to schedule family time. Family time has been attacking you since sunrise. Yet there is another side to this closeness. You are rarely alone during difficulty. A frightened child wakes within reach of another person. An elderly relative hears familiar voices nearby during a winter storm. Bodies gather around the same source of heat. During illness, someone notices when you stop eating. The cottage gives little privacy, but it creates constant human presence. You begin to understand why home can be both crowded and reassuring. Then the hearth crackles, a piece of wood shifts in the fire, sending sparks briefly upward. Every face turns toward it automatically, because more than the walls, more than the beds, and perhaps more than any single piece of furniture, the fire controls the rhythm of this room. You edge closer to its warmth. Soon you will discover just how completely the household depends upon it. You move closer to the hearth, and immediately the entire cottage seems to reorganize itself around this one glowing patch of heat. The fire is not decoration, it is infrastructure. Without it, your food remains raw, your winter evenings become dangerously cold, damp clothing takes longer to dry, and the interior falls into darkness much earlier than you would like. The hearth is kitchen, heater, lamp, drying rack, gathering place, an occasional source of mild panic. You hold your hands toward the flames. The warmth feels wonderful from the front. Your back remains cold. This is one of the small frustrations of an open hearth. Heat does not distribute itself evenly through the room. The person nearest the fire feels comfortable. The person 3 steps away may be reconsidering several life choices. Smoke rises above the burning wood. Some of it escapes through openings in the roof or through whatever ventilation the structure provides. Some of it does not. Instead, it drifts beneath the rafters, stains the timbers, catches in your throat, and slowly perfumes every textile in the cottage with the unmistakable fragrance of combustion. Your hair smells of smoke. Your clothing smells of smoke. Your blankets smell of smoke. The bread may smell faintly of smoke. At this point, even your thoughts probably smell of smoke. In many modest medieval rural homes, especially those without developed chimney systems, open hearths remain central to cooking and heating. Chimneys certainly exist in medieval Europe, particularly in wealthier buildings, but they are far from universal in poor cottages during the 13th century. So you live with the smoke, not happily, perhaps, but habitually. The hearth itself may be little more than a prepared area of packed clay, stone, or another fire-resistant surface. Its exact form depends on the building and local resources. A pot can hang above the flames from an iron hook, chain, wooden support or other arrangement, while smaller vessels sit near the embers. Cooking requires judgment. There is no temperature dial. You cannot set the fire to 180 degrees and wander away. You manage heat by controlling fuel, moving pots closer or farther from the flame, shifting embers, suspending vessels at different heights, and relying on experience. Too much heat and something burns. Too little, and supper becomes a very long philosophical exercise. The woman tending the pot does not need a recipe card telling her exactly what to do. She recognizes the sound of simmering liquid. She understands how quickly particular woods burn. She knows when embers are better than open flame. This practical knowledge is passed through repetition. Children watch. Older relatives advise. Mistakes are remembered. A familiar historical reality sits quietly in front of you here. Firewood and other fuels consume a considerable amount of household labor. Someone must gather, cut, carry, stack, dry, and protect fuel before it can warm the cottage. Woodland access may be regulated. Deadwood collection may depend on local rights. In some regions, households can also burn peat, brushwood, crop residues, or other available materials. Heat begins long before the match, except, of course, you do not have matches either. Keeping fire becomes important precisely because relighting it can be inconvenient. Embers may be preserved overnight beneath ash, ready to be coaxed back into flame in the morning. You watch someone carefully rearrange the hearth. Ash is moved. A dark coal appears beneath it. A little dry material is placed nearby. Someone blows gently. For a moment, nothing happens. Then a faint orange glow brightens. There is something deeply satisfying about it. Also, something slightly humiliating if you have ever complained that your modern stove takes 8 seconds to ignite. Fire starting methods vary, but flint, steel, tinder, and preserved embers all belong to the wider medieval toolkit. Dry tinder matters, patience matters. Having a neighbour with a functioning fire probably matters occasionally as well. There are accounts from later traditional communities of households borrowing embers or coals from one another when a domestic fire goes out. Whether every 13th century village followed identical habits is impossible to say, but the practice is practical enough to feel immediately believable. You picture yourself walking across muddy ground with a carefully protected ember. Suddenly your microwave seems almost offensively convenient. The hearth also creates risk, sparks leap. Children move nearby. Dry straw exists in abundance. Wooden walls and roof structures surround you. The entire building is basically a collection of things fire finds encouraging. People know this. They do not need a modern safety poster to understand that flames can destroy a home. Water containers may be kept within reach. The hearth is tended carefully. Young children are warned away from dangerous areas. Yet accidents remain possible, especially in crowded spaces where cooking, sleeping, storage, and work happen close together. The smell of smoke thickens for a moment when the wind changes. Your eyes sting. You blink several times. Smoke inhalation is one of the less picturesque realities of open hearth living. Long exposure to indoor smoke could irritate eyes and lungs, although precisely how much smoke accumulated in different medieval cottages depends heavily on roof design, ventilation, fuel quality, and hearth arrangement. Researchers still wrestle with how smoky ordinary medieval interiors actually were because experimental archaeology can produce very different results depending on construction details. A roof that seems almost sealed may create unexpected airflow, while another design may trap smoke far more effectively. So you should resist imagining every cottage as permanently invisible behind a grey cloud, but neither should you imagine fresh alpine air. The truth is probably less dramatic and more irritating. Smoke comes and goes, wind matters, fuel matters, weather matters. Your eyes occasionally complain. Then there is light. Once daylight fades, the fire becomes one of the strongest sources of illumination available to the household. Its glow is uneven. Shadows move constantly. Faces brighten and disappear as flames rise and collapse. Corners of the cottage retreat into darkness. A wooden spoon catches the light. A pot shines briefly. Someone's hands move through orange flicker while repairing cloth. The room feels smaller after sunset because the fire illuminates only part of it. You begin to understand why people gather near the hearth, even when they are not cooking. Warmth draws bodies inward. Light draws work inward. Conversation follows. Stories may be told here. Instructions are given. Arguments begin here too. Because warmth does not automatically improve personalities. One less obvious use of the smoky upper space is preservation. Certain foods can benefit from drying or exposure to smoke, and herbs or other materials may be hung overhead where warmth and moving air help reduce moisture. You glance upward. Bundles disappear among dark rafters. Smoke has blackened parts of the timber, the cottage ceiling, if you can really call it that. Records years of fires in soot. The hearth has left its signature everywhere. By now the cooking pot is sending a familiar smell into the room. Something grain-based. Something vegetable-heavy. Something that has probably been simmering longer than most modern television series. Your stomach responds immediately. That is when the hearth reveals its most important power. It does not merely warm the cottage, it transforms stored ingredients into meals, and once the pot is ready, your attention shifts naturally from the fire beneath it to whatever is waiting inside. You lean toward the pot, and the smell becomes easier to identify. Grain, onion, perhaps cabbage or leeks. A little salt if the household can spare it. Maybe peas or beans. Nothing glamorous is happening in that vessel, but glamour is not the point. The food simmering over the hearth is designed to keep people working, walking, carrying, digging, lifting, and surviving until the next meal. This is where the romantic medieval feast disappears completely. There are no silver platters, no mountains of roasted meat, no endless procession of pies shaped like castles. Those belong to wealthier tables, ceremonial occasions, and the imagination of people who have confused a noble banquet with everyday rural life. Your breakfast may be much simpler. Bread is central. The loaf placed on the table is dark, dense, and heavier than the soft white bread you know, depending on region, harvest, household resources, and local custom. It might contain wheat, rye, barley, oats, or mixtures of grains. Poorer households often rely on grains that are cheaper or easier to grow locally. You tear off a piece. The crust resists slightly. The interior is coarse. There may be bits of husk or uneven texture in the flour because milling and sieving are not producing the perfectly uniform powder expected by modern supermarkets. Still, the bread is filling, that matters, in much of medieval Europe. Cereals provide a substantial share of ordinary people's calories. Bread, porridge, pottage, and ale turn harvested grain into the basic energy that keeps agricultural communities moving. So when you look at a loaf, you're really looking at stored summer sunlight. Fields were ploughed, seed was scattered, weeds were fought, grain was cut, bundles were carried, heads were threshed, kernels were winnowed, grain was taken for milling, flour became dough, dough became bread. By the time you take one bite, an astonishing chain of labour has already taken place. Suddenly leaving half a sandwich untouched feels slightly disrespectful. The pot beside you contains pottage, one of the great practical foods of medieval life. The idea is beautifully simple. Take a liquid base, Add grain, vegetables, legumes, herbs, and whatever else is available. Let it cook, eat some, add more ingredients later, cook again. A household pot can change character from day to day depending on season and supply. In a good period, it may be thick and nourishing. In a lean period, it may become considerably more optimistic than substantial. You lift a wooden spoon, steam touches your face. The texture is soft and thick. With ingredients that have been cooking long enough to lose any interest in maintaining separate identities, it tastes better than you expected. Not exciting, but warm. After a cold morning, warm is persuasive. Vegetables play a larger role in medieval rural diets than popular images sometimes suggest. Peas, beans, onions, leeks, cabbage, garlic, and various herbs can appear depending on location and season. Gardens near rural homes provide useful supplements to grain-based staples. Wild plants may also be gathered. Knowledge of edible greens, berries, nuts, fungi, and herbs is practical rather than fashionable. You cannot search online to determine whether a plant is safe. Someone taught you. And hopefully that person knew what they were doing. One lesser-known pleasure available to some rural households is dairy. Milk does not keep well without refrigeration, so transforming it into butter or cheese makes excellent sense. Cheese stores longer and concentrates nutrition into a manageable form. You may eat a small piece with bread. It is firm, salty, perhaps sharply flavoured. The exact character depends on how it was made, what animal produced the milk and how long the cheese has been kept. Cow's milk is important in many areas, but sheep and goats can also contribute. Eggs may appear when hens are laying. Fish can supplement diets where rivers, ponds, coastlines, or local rights make fishing possible. And then there is meat. Yes, medieval farmers eat meat. No, most poor households are not eating enormous portions of it every day. Pork, bacon, poultry, mutton, beef, and other animal products can appear, especially around slaughtering seasons or particular celebrations, but access varies enormously according to wealth and local conditions. A pig can be particularly useful because it converts scraps and forage into valuable meat and fat, if a household can keep one successfully. Autumn slaughter provides food that may be salted, smoked, or otherwise preserved for later use. You look suspiciously toward the yard. Somewhere outside, a pig is enjoying a peaceful morning without knowing this conversation is happening. Scholars have spent considerable effort trying to reconstruct exactly how much meat ordinary medieval peasants consumed, and the answer remains frustratingly uneven. Archaeological animal bones, manorial records, household accounts, regional ecology, and changing economic conditions tell different stories from one place to another. The poorest labourer and a prosperous tenant farmer may technically belong to the broad rural population while eating very differently. So there is no single medieval peasant menu. Your bowl depends on who you are, where you live, what year it is, whether the harvest was good, what your obligations are, and what remains after dues, rents, seed requirements, and storage needs have been considered. The year 1271 does not automatically mean starvation, but food security is fragile. A poor harvest is not an inconvenience, it is a threat that makes storage vital. Grain must be kept dry, salted foods must be protected, cheese needs appropriate conditions, vegetables can be stored, dried, or consumed seasonally. Apples and other fruits may be preserved in various ways. Every household develops strategies for stretching abundance forward into scarcity. You drink from a simple cup. What is inside may surprise people accustomed to exaggerated claims that medieval people never drink water. They absolutely do drink water when it is accessible and considered suitable. Ale is also common because grain is readily available. Brewing produces a nutritious drink, and low-strength household ales can form part of ordinary consumption. This does not mean everyone is permanently drunk by breakfast. The alcohol content of everyday small ale can be modest, and strength varies. Still, ale provides calories. It also gives the household another reason to maintain vessels, fuel, grain supplies, and brewing knowledge. Brewing may happen domestically, and in many communities women play an important role in producing and sometimes selling ale. One amusing detail follows naturally from this. Medieval authorities sometimes regulate the quality, price, or measure of bread and ale because both are so essential to daily life. Bad bread or dishonest measures are not minor annoyances when these products form the foundation of people's diets. Even breakfast has economics hiding inside it. You finish another spoonful of pottage. The meal is repetitive, but repetition itself is part of survival. People do not expect every meal to entertain them. Food has seasons. Fresh possibilities rise and fall through the year. Spring can be lean. Summer brings greens and dairy abundance. Autumn offers harvest and slaughter. Winter depends increasingly on what has been stored successfully, and all the while, the body demands fuel. Your own body is already reminding you that breakfast does not mark the end of the morning. It marks the beginning of work. Someone near the doorway pulls on a woolen outer garment. Another person wraps cloth more securely around the legs. Shoes are checked. A tear is noticed. A patch has been added where another patch was already beginning to fail. You set down your bowl and look at your own clothing. It is time to discover what stands between your skin and an entire landscape of mud, wind, rain, smoke, sweat, and persistent medieval insects. You look down at what you're wearing and quickly understand that medieval clothing is less about fashion in the modern sense and more about managing weather, work, modesty, status, and whatever the countryside decides to throw at you. Linen lies closest to the skin. Wool does much of the heavier work. That basic combination makes practical sense. Linen can be used for shirts, shifts, undergarments, head coverings, and other items worn close to the body, while wool provides warmth and can remain useful even in damp conditions. You pinch the fabric between your fingers. It is not especially soft. Nothing about your clothing feels designed for lounging beside a hotel pool. The cloth has weight, the seams are noticeable, the fit is functional rather than perfectly tailored, and almost every piece represents a considerable investment of labour. Before a woolen garment reaches your body, sheep must be raised, fleeces shorn, wool cleaned, sorted, carded or combed, spun into thread, woven into cloth, finished, cut and sewn. Linen demands its own exhausting chain of work. Flax must be grown, harvested, processed, broken, scutched, heckled, spun, woven, and eventually turned into fabric. Your shirt is not cheap disposable clothing, it is stored labour. That is why garments are repaired so aggressively. A tear does not mean replacement. A tear means thread. You notice a patch on one sleeve, then another patch near the hem. One piece of cloth has been sewn over an older worn section, and the colour does not quite match. Nobody seems embarrassed. The garment still works. That is the important part. Clothes may move through a household over time, especially as children grow. An older child's garment can be altered for a younger sibling. Adult clothing may be cut down. Worn cloth can become wrapping, patches, cleaning material, or something else useful. Fabric rarely gets the dramatic retirement ceremony modern clothing sometimes receives. It simply becomes another object. You pull on a woolen outer layer. The warmth is immediate, so is the scratchiness. Wool quality varies enormously, of course, and finer cloth exists, but a rural farming household is unlikely to dress entirely in luxurious material. Coarser wool can be perfectly effective while offering your skin a persistent reminder that comfort is not the primary design philosophy. Tunics are common garments for men, while women generally wear long dresses or gowns over linen underlayers, though exact styles shift according to place, status, and period. Belts matter. They help secure clothing and provide somewhere to hang useful objects. A small knife, pouch, keys, or other practical items can travel at the waist. Pockets in the modern sewn-in sense are not yet quietly swallowing your belongings, so if you need to carry something, you improvise around belts, bags, sleeves, and pouches. A surprisingly important detail is the head covering. Men and women often cover the head in various ways, not merely because of modesty or convention, but because cloth keeps hair controlled and offers warmth. A linen coif, hood, veil, wimple, or other covering can help against cold, dust, smoke, and sun depending on the wearer and circumstance. Your medieval hairstyle is therefore frequently hidden beneath something useful. Bad hair days have been partially defeated by architecture. Then you look at your legs. For men, hose or fitted leg coverings can be worn beneath or with tunics. Women generally rely on longer garments that cover the legs, with stockings or hose beneath. Footwear is another matter. Leather shoes are common, but shoes wear quickly when they're exposed to mud, rough ground, agricultural work, and constant walking. You pick one up. The sole looks thin compared with a modern work boot. The leather bends easily. This is not footwear designed to make you feel invincible. It is footwear designed to separate your feet from the ground as economically as possible. Shoes can be repaired. Soles can be patched or replaced depending on construction and resources. A household with limited money cannot treat worn footwear casually. You step outside. Mud accepts your arrival immediately. It presses around the shoe, sticks to the sole, and follows you with enthusiasm. Country lanes, yards, fields, and paths become deeply unpleasant in wet weather. Clothing hems collect dirt. Shoes become damp. Wool absorbs smells. Linen needs washing. Nothing stays clean for long. This is why the romantic image of a medieval farmer standing eternally spotless in cream-coloured linen should be approached carefully. Working clothes look worked in. Sweat darkens cloth. Smoke settles into fibres. Mud dries along hems. Dust enters seams. Rain leaves everything clammy. And then there are insects. Fleas and lice are persistent possibilities in medieval domestic life, especially where people, bedding, clothing, and animals live close together. You scratch your neck. Now you are thinking about it. Excellent. One curious response to parasites is not simply surrender. People comb hair, wash clothing, air bedding, remove insects manually, use herbs or substances believed to discourage pests, and sometimes delouse seams. Fine-toothed combs have been found archaeologically from many historical periods, offering a wonderfully intimate reminder that human beings have been waging personal wars against tiny unwanted residents for a very long time. The struggle is ancient. The enemy is small. The victory is temporary. The widespread idea that medieval people never wash their clothing is also too simple. Laundry exists, though it requires substantial effort. Water must be carried or clothing taken to a suitable water source. Fabric can be soaked, beaten, rinsed, scrubbed, treated with alkaline substances, and dried. Ash-based lye or soap can assist cleaning where available. None of this is as effortless. Imagine carrying several heavy wet garments back from a stream. Your washing machine suddenly begins to seem like a minor household deity. Textile historians still disagree over how frequently poorer rural families washed particular garments, especially heavy woolen outer layers, because daily practice rarely leaves tidy written evidence. Linen worn close to the body must be washed more regularly than thick wool. While season, water access, labour demands, and the number of garments owned all affect the rhythm. One household may manage several changes of linen, Another may possess very little. A wealthier farmer dresses differently from a landless labourer. Again, medieval rural life refuses to become one universal costume. Colour also deserves attention. Poor does not automatically mean dressed entirely in brown. Natural wool can produce whites, creams, greys, browns, and blacks. Dyes made from plants and other substances can create additional colours, though intensity, permanence, cost, and availability vary. Muted reds, yellows, greens, blues, and other shades are possible. Bright, expensive dyes may signal wealth, but rural clothing can still possess colour. You may not resemble a walking rainbow, but neither are you required to dress like the landscape has personally issued you camouflage. The most important feature remains durability. You own fewer clothes, you expect more from them. A garment must survive work, weather, repeated repairs, dirt, and perhaps several owners. You return toward the doorway and brush dried mud from your hem. Inside, clothing hangs from pegs and beams. A pair of shoes rests near the wall. A folded textile sits inside a chest. Nothing occupies space without reason, and that leads your attention naturally toward the cottage's furniture. Because once you have dressed a household, stored its clothing, protected its tools, and found somewhere for everyone to sit and sleep, you discover just how cleverly a few wooden objects must serve almost every purpose imaginable. You look around the cottage again, this time not at the walls or clothing, but at the objects trying to organise all this human activity. There are fewer of them than you expect. A bench, a stool, a chest, perhaps a table, though not every household possesses one in the form you might imagine. A bed frame if fortune allows, a few shelves, some pegs hammered into timber, and that is almost enough to run an entire household. Modern rooms are often defined by furniture. A dining room has a table, a bedroom has a bed, a living room has chairs, shelves, perhaps several objects whose main purpose appears to be holding other decorative objects. Your cottage cannot afford that level of specialization. A bench is for sitting. Yes, it is also for sleeping, for placing baskets, for sorting food, for supporting a child who has fallen asleep before supper, for holding tools while somebody repairs a harness. The bench does not complain about career changes, neither does the chest. A sturdy wooden chest is one of the most useful possessions in the room. Clothing can go inside it, cloth can go inside it, small valuables, food supplies, documents, tools, or household goods may be stored there depending on circumstance. Then somebody sits on it. Now it is furniture again. The lid creaks as you lift it. Inside, everything is tightly arranged because wasted space is almost offensive here. A folded garment rests beside a length of cloth. A small pouch disappears into one corner. Perhaps there is a wooden spoon, a piece of cord, or something too useful to leave lying where a child or animal might claim it. Storage is not merely about neatness, it is protection. Mice are interested in food. Damp is interested in cloth. Children are interested in everything. If something matters, you put it somewhere deliberate. The archaeological record makes clear that wooden domestic objects were widespread in medieval life, but wood survives poorly compared with stone, pottery, or metal. That means many ordinary interiors have vanished almost completely, leaving historians to reconstruct them from inventories, excavated fragments, illustrations, surviving buildings, and later parallels. The result is a strange imbalance. We sometimes know far more about a nobleman's ceremonial cup than about the stool a farming family used every day for 20 years. You sit on one. It is low, simple, stable enough. After several hours of fieldwork, you would probably consider it magnificent. Tables are equally practical. A large permanent dining table is not guaranteed in a modest cottage. Boards can be laid across supports when needed, then moved or repurposed. Smaller tables may serve food preparation, craft work, or meals. The familiar phrase board and lodging makes a little more sense when boards themselves can become temporary eating surfaces. You imagine setting up supper, a plank appears, supports are arranged, bowls come out, everyone gathers, meal finished, the room changes again. This flexibility is essential because the same few square meters must keep changing purpose. Furniture cannot dominate the space, it must cooperate with it. Even beds may be less straightforward than you expect. A prosperous rural household might own a substantial wooden bed frame, while poorer people may sleep on pallets or simple structures filled with straw, chaff, wool, or other available material. A straw-filled mattress is not necessarily miserable when it is fresh, dry, and well maintained. You press your hand against one, it yields softly. For a moment, you reconsider your assumptions. Then a piece of straw pokes through the covering and restores historical balance. Bedding itself may be more valuable than the frame beneath it. Blankets require wool, sheets require linen. Both require immense labour. A household may therefore treasure textiles even when the wooden structure underneath looks plain. There is an almost comical detail in medieval inventories from wealthier households. Beds can be among the most valuable objects listed. Not because medieval people have discovered luxury mattresses with mysterious branding, but because curtains, coverings, sheets, cushions, and elaborate textiles can represent enormous expense. Your farmer's cottage is far humbler, yet the principle remains. Soft things are costly, wood is easier. A shelf along the wall supports bowls and vessels, some are ceramic, some are wooden. Metal objects are fewer because metal is expensive and valuable enough to repair, reuse, and guard carefully. A cooking pot may be iron or ceramic, depending on means and local tradition. Knives matter enormously. Spoons are common. Forks, especially individual table forks in the modern sense, are not yet part of ordinary English peasant dining. You stare at your bowl. Your options are spoon, knife, fingers, and bread. Civilization continues somehow. Wooden bowls and trenchers are especially useful because they can be produced locally by skilled craftspeople and repaired or replaced more easily than fine tableware. Pottery fragments appear frequently at archaeological sites precisely because ceramic breaks and remains in the soil long after wood has decayed. So when excavators uncover a medieval settlement, broken pots may tell a surprisingly intimate story. What was cooked, what was stored, where vessels came from, how frequently households acquired new goods. Even rubbish has a biography. Along the wall, wooden pegs do extraordinary amounts of work. Clothing hangs from them, bags, tools, ropes, perhaps herbs, possibly a lantern or container. Anything that can leave the floor probably should. The same logic explains why rafters become storage territory. You glance upward and see bundles suspended beyond easy reach. A cottage with almost no cupboards has discovered the ceiling. One line of interpretation among architectural historians suggests that many reconstructed rural interiors may actually appear too sparse because perishable objects have vanished from the record. Baskets, wooden containers, textiles, leather bags, cords, tools, and hanging goods could have filled a room much more densely than surviving evidence first implies. Others caution against overfilling these spaces in imagination, especially when household wealth was genuinely limited. The truth may vary from one cottage to the next. Your room certainly does not feel empty. A basket blocks your foot. A spoon disappears beneath a cloth. Someone moves a stool because you're standing in the wrong place again. There is that look. You recognize it now. You move. A spindle lies near the wall. A distaff may stand nearby. Textile work is among the most persistent domestic tasks, and small tools associated with spinning, sewing, and weaving can occupy corners of the home without requiring large furniture. Repair tools do the same, and all, a whetstone, cord, a wooden mallet, a knife that seems to participate in every possible activity. The fewer possessions you own, the more jobs each one performs. That is perhaps the clearest lesson of the room. Nothing is merely decorative. Even objects with emotional or religious significance usually occupy a practical world of limited space. A small cross, image, charm, or keepsake may matter deeply. But it must coexist with bowls, tools, clothing, baskets, and people. You begin to see the cottage less as poorly furnished and more as efficiently furnished. There is almost no redundancy. 3 chairs for 2 people would be absurd. A second chest must justify its existence. A broken bowl is repaired if possible. A damaged basket is patched. A wooden handle is replaced rather than discarding the tool. Objects age alongside the household. You can see where hands have touched the same surface for years. A bench is smoother at the edge. A chest lid bears scratches. A spoon has darkened from use. The furniture remembers the family physically, and then your eye falls on the floor again. Straw, dust, ash, dried mud, scraps. Perhaps a few suspiciously active specks near the bedding. You have learned how the household stores its belongings. Now you must confront what happens to everything else. Because living in one crowded room is manageable only if somebody keeps cleaning it, and medieval cleanliness is about to prove considerably more complicated than the old jokes suggest. You lower your gaze to the floor and notice that medieval cleanliness begins with a very simple problem. Everything comes inside. Mud comes in on shoes. Ash escapes from the hearth. Bits of straw break loose from bedding. Food crumbs fall. Dust settles. Children contribute their own mysterious layer of disorder, and if animals cross the threshold, they bring additional enthusiasm. The cottage, therefore, needs constant attention if it is not going to become unbearable. A broom appears, not the neat synthetic thing waiting in a modern kitchen cupboard, but a practical bundle of twigs or plant material bound to a handle. It scratches across the packed floor, pushing ash, dirt, straw, and scraps toward the doorway. Someone does this regularly. That alone should make you suspicious of the old fantasy that medieval people happily lived for years inside mountains of untouched filth. They do not possess modern sanitation, but they do possess eyes, noses, hands, and a strong interest in keeping pests away from food and bedding. The floor may be covered at times with rushes, straw, or other plant material, especially in particular regions or types of household. Fresh material can help absorb moisture and provide a cleaner surface. Dirty material can be removed. It does not need to become an archaeological lasagna of 15 winters, spilled ale, and forgotten chicken accidents. The famous image of medieval floors layered endlessly with rotting rushes comes largely from later commentary. Elite settings, and broad generalizations that have often been repeated far beyond their evidence. Your own household cannot afford to treat waste casually. Organic scraps may feed animals. Ash has uses. Dung can fertilize fields. Broken wood may become fuel. Even rubbish can have value. You step toward the doorway and breathe outside air immediately. It feels remarkably clean. Behind the cottage there may be a designated place for waste. Though arrangements vary enormously, a simple pit, midden, ditch, heap, or shared disposal area can collect material that cannot be reused. Human waste presents its own challenge. You're not looking for a porcelain toilet. You may use a privy if one exists nearby, perhaps a simple seat positioned over a pit or cess area. In poorer circumstances, arrangements may be much more basic. A chamber pot, bucket, yard, or secluded place can all become part of the answer. There is no single peasant bathroom layout waiting across 13th century England. That uncertainty is important. Archaeologists can sometimes identify cesspits, drains, or latrine structures especially in towns and larger sites, but humble rural sanitation leaves far less obvious evidence. The absence of a surviving privy does not necessarily mean people had no customary place for bodily waste. It may simply mean wood rotted. Pits were filled, and 8 centuries erased the arrangement. You decide not to investigate too closely. A rare moment of wisdom. Water matters more. Someone must fetch it. The nearest source may be a well, spring, stream, river, pond, or other supply depending on local conditions. If the household has access to a good well nearby, that is a major convenience. If not, water becomes another burden carried by hand. You lift a bucket. Immediately, cleanliness becomes heavier. Water for drinking must be fetched. Water for cooking must be fetched. Water for washing must be fetched. Water for laundry must be fetched. Every additional rinse has a physical cost. This does not prevent washing. It changes how casually you use water. You're unlikely to stand beneath a hot shower for 20 minutes contemplating your life. Instead, you wash deliberately. Hands, face, perhaps feet, other parts of the body as needed. A basin and cloth can accomplish quite a lot. Medieval medical and religious texts also contain repeated references to washing, bathing, grooming, and bodily cleanliness, which would be rather strange if everyone had collectively agreed never to touch water. Bathhouses exist in towns, although they are less relevant to your farming cottage at home. Bathing the entire body requires more effort. A tub must be available. Water has to be transported. If you want it warm, somebody must heat it. That is a substantial amount of work for one bath, so full immersion is unlikely to happen every morning. But infrequent full bathing is not the same as never washing. The distinction matters. You dip a cloth into a basin and wipe your hands. The water quickly clouds. Field work, hearth work, food preparation, animals, and mud ensure that hands become dirty constantly. Practical hygiene follows practical need. Before dealing with food, after handling particularly unpleasant substances, or when grime becomes uncomfortable, washing makes sense. Soap exists too. Medieval soap can be made using fats and alkaline substances such as lye derived from ash. Quality varies, and soap is not necessarily a cheap everyday luxury for every rural household. But the technology is certainly known. Laundry often relies on stronger methods. Linen can be soaked, beaten, rubbed, rinsed, and treated with alkaline solutions. You imagine carrying a basket of dirty clothing to a stream, then carrying the same clothing home while it is saturated with water. The second basket is considerably less charming. Women perform much of this domestic labour in many communities. Although specific household arrangements vary, laundry can become communal work when people gather near a river or shared washing place. Clothing is scrubbed. Conversation flows. Information travels. A simple chore becomes part of village social life. There is even a slightly unexpected cleanliness problem above your head. Soot. Open hearths gradually blacken rafters and coat surfaces. Cooking vessels become dark. Walls may need fresh treatment. Objects near the fire collect grime faster. A pale-washed interior, where households use lime or similar finishes, can therefore require renewal to remain bright. Cleanliness is less a permanent state than a repeating cycle. Sweep, wash, scrape, air, dry, repair, begin again. Bedding deserves particular attention because parasites appreciate it almost as much as you do. Straw stuffing can be removed and replaced. Blankets can be shaken outside. Bedding can be aired in sunlight when weather allows. Seams can be inspected. Combs pass through hair. None of these measures guarantees victory against fleas or lice, but neither does the household surrender without resistance. One of the more revealing finds from medieval archaeological sites is the humble comb, sometimes with extremely fine teeth. Such objects are excellent at removing lice and nits, reminding you that personal grooming is not a modern invention. You run your fingers through your hair instinctively. Again, you really should stop doing that. Ideas about odor are more difficult to reconstruct. People living around smoke, animals, manure, sweat, leather, damp wool, and open drains probably possess a different baseline for what smells normal than you do. Yet different does not mean non-existent. Bad smells can signal spoiled food, stagnant water, illness, waste, or something that needs attention. Noses remain useful. Herbs may be scattered, hung, added to bedding, or used in washing for scent and other supposed benefits. Lavender, rosemary, mint, or local aromatic plants can make an interior more pleasant where available. Whether every poor farmer regularly perfumes the cottage is another matter. Probably not. But a little crushed herb beneath the nose after dealing with the waste heap would certainly feel reasonable. You return inside. The room is still smoky. The floor is still rough. Nothing resembles a modern sanitized home. Yet it no longer looks like the legendary swamp of medieval dirt. It is simply a place where cleanliness demands physical work. Water is precious, waste management is imperfect, and keeping things tolerable requires constant effort. Then something scratches near the wall. You turn. A small animal disappears behind a chest. Outside, chickens cluck. A pig grunts. Somewhere near the doorway, a dog stretches and settles again. Keeping a cottage clean becomes even more complicated when human beings are only part of the population living around it. You follow the scratching sound toward the wall, but whatever caused it has already disappeared into a gap too narrow for your fingers and apparently designed specifically to frustrate you. A mouse, most likely, perhaps several. They have every reason to be here. Your cottage contains grain, crumbs, straw, warmth, and enough dark corners to support a small civilization. Rodents are not welcome guests, but they are persistent ones. So are insects. So are chickens. So, depending on the weather and household arrangement, are larger animals that blur the boundary between barnyard and living space. You step toward the doorway and find the yard alive with movement. A few hens scratch at the ground. A pig investigates something near a fence with impressive concentration. A dog lies where everyone must step around it. Beyond that, cattle or sheep may occupy nearby pens, fields, sheds, or attached agricultural spaces. This is not a home surrounded by animals as decoration. Animals are part of the household economy. They produce food. They provide labour. They supply wool, hides, manure, traction, milk, eggs and meat. They also make noise at inconvenient hours. The chicken begins first. It has apparently decided that the morning has not been properly announced. You hear clucking, scratching, wing beats, and the sudden sharp complaint of a bird objecting to something nobody else can identify. Medieval rural households commonly keep poultry because hens require relatively little space and can provide eggs as well as meat. Egg production, of course, changes with season and feeding. You cannot simply demand 12 eggs every morning because a recipe requires them. The hens have not read your schedule. A pig offers a different kind of value. Pigs can consume household scraps and forage in suitable environments, including woodland where local rights allow pannage, the practice of turning swine out to feed on fallen nuts such as acorns and beech mast, in a good autumn. That woodland feeding can help fatten the animal before slaughter. The pig therefore converts material humans cannot easily use into concentrated food. Efficient, practical, loud. You watch it push its snout through the mud. It appears completely satisfied with the arrangement. Keeping such an animal is not effortless. It needs supervision. Fences must work. Food must be available. Disease or injury can destroy an investment. and a pig that escapes into someone else's crops is not likely to improve village relations. Cattle are even more significant. An ox may provide traction for ploughing and hauling. A cow may produce milk, calves, hides, manure, and eventually meat. Oxen are especially valuable in many medieval farming systems because heavy agricultural work depends on animal power. A team can pull a plough through soil far more effectively than you can. This is fortunate because after 5 minutes of trying to do it yourself, you would probably retire from medieval agriculture permanently. Animals therefore stand at the centre of the farming calendar. Feed must be secured, pasture must be managed, hay must be cut and stored, water must be provided. Young animals need care, sick animals need attention. The cottage may be your shelter, but much of your daily thinking revolves around creatures outside it. Sometimes, however, the outside comes in during severe cold, illness, birth, theft risk, or other circumstances. Smaller livestock may be brought closer to human living areas. In some longhouse traditions, people and cattle occupy different sections beneath the same roof, though arrangements vary greatly across regions. That variation matters, especially in 13th century England. Some rural buildings combine domestic and agricultural functions. Others separate them more clearly. Archaeological plans reveal different patterns depending on region, status, date, and local building tradition. The idea that every medieval peasant sleeps cheerfully beside a cow is too simple. But neither is the modern separation between house and animal building absolute. You may share walls, you may share roofs. You certainly share smells. Manure is everywhere around an active farm. This sounds unpleasant because it is unpleasant. It is also valuable. Dung can be gathered and spread onto fields as fertilizer, returning nutrients to the soil. The same substance you avoid stepping in becomes part of future harvests. Nothing on the farm has the courtesy to remain merely disgusting. Everything has an economic function. One particularly revealing detail about medieval villages is the importance of manure rights, grazing rights, woodland access, and common pasture. These are not tiny technical matters. They can determine whether a household can maintain livestock successfully. Animals connect you to law and custom as much as to agriculture. Where may your cow graze? How many pigs may enter woodland? When can sheep move onto common fields? Who repairs fences? If livestock damages another person's crop, who pays? A quiet village contains an impressive amount of negotiation beneath the surface. Then there are cats. You may begin to appreciate one immediately. Cats appear in medieval domestic settings partly because they are useful predators where grain is stored. Rodents follow where rodents follow. A cat becomes less a decorative companion and more a furry security service. You notice one moving beneath the bench. It freezes. Its eyes follow something you cannot see. For the first time all morning, you feel genuine optimism about the mouse situation. Medieval attitudes toward cats are complicated. They can be valued as mousers, kept as companions, associated with symbolism, and sometimes treated with suspicion in particular religious or folkloric contexts. But the later stereotype that medieval Europe simply hates cats is much too broad. Practical usefulness has a strong argument. Dogs are equally versatile. A farm dog may guard property, assist with livestock, hunt, warn of strangers, or simply attach itself to the household. Different dogs have different roles. The elaborate variety of modern breeds is not your concern here, but medieval people certainly distinguish useful types by size, behavior, and purpose. The dog near your doorway seems to specialize in sleeping directly in walking routes. Perhaps this is an ancient breed characteristic. Sheep extend the household's world even farther. Their wool becomes clothing, milk may become cheese, Meat can become food, skins and other products have uses, but sheep also require grazing, protection, seasonal management, shearing, and considerable attention. A flock is wealth walking around on four legs and attempting to wander away. People must watch it. Children or hired herders may spend long hours with animals away from the cottage. This creates a daily geography far larger than the house itself. Your home is the centre. Fields, commons, meadows, woodland, streams, roads, and pasture radiate outward from it. Animals move through all of them. Researchers studying medieval rural settlements continue to question precisely how animals were housed at night in different regions, particularly when timber structures leave only partial traces. Some excavated buildings seem to contain drainage or floor patterns consistent with livestock areas, while others suggest more separate arrangements. The evidence refuses to give one tidy answer. Your nose provides a simpler conclusion. Animals are nearby. Very nearby. Even when they remain outside, they enter the cottage indirectly. Wool arrives, milk arrives, eggs arrive, mud arrives, fleas may arrive, leather arrives, manure clings to boots, feathers drift through doors, a mouse arrives because everyone else brought food. Human and animal life overlap constantly. By late afternoon, the yard settles into a slower rhythm. Chickens begin moving towards shelter. Livestock is checked. Gates are secured. Feed is distributed where needed. The dog finally stands, stretches, circles once, and lies down somewhere equally inconvenient. Then the sunlight begins to weaken. The cottage doorway turns from a bright rectangle into a dull grey opening. One by one, the details of the yard disappear, and as darkness gathers, every animal's sound becomes louder. A grunt outside, a hoof against wood, a rustle in straw. A dog suddenly barking at something beyond the hedge, without streetlights, electric lamps, or illuminated windows. Night does not merely arrive around the cottage, it takes possession of it. You notice the darkness before you notice the cold. It gathers first in the corners, then beneath the table, then along the walls where the last daylight can no longer reach. The doorway, bright only a short while ago, becomes a pale rectangle against the evening. Outside, the village changes character. Paths disappear. Hedges become black shapes. Trees lose their detail. The sky remains visible longer than the ground, and for a brief while you can still see a thin band of fading light above the fields. Then that too begins to vanish. There is no switch to press, no lamp beside the bed, no glow from another room. Once the sun sets, your choices narrow quickly. The hearth becomes the centre of vision as well as warmth. Orange light flicker across faces and wooden surfaces. Shadows stretch across the walls and move whenever someone shifts a log. One person brings out a small source of additional light, perhaps a rushlight. It is simple, cheap, and surprisingly effective for something so modest. A dried rush can be peeled to expose the pith, then soaked in fat or grease. When lit, it produces a small flame that lasts long enough to illuminate basic household tasks. Not brilliantly, not elegantly, but enough. You watch the flame tremble. It seems absurdly small compared with a modern bulb, yet in this room, it matters. A candle would be brighter and more convenient, but candles cost resources. Beeswax candles are valuable and more associated with churches, wealthy households, and better-off users. Tallow candles made from animal fat are cheaper, though they can smell unpleasant and burn with more smoke. Your farming household uses light carefully because producing it requires labour and material. That simple reality shapes the entire evening. People do not remain awake for hours merely because entertainment exists. Light itself has a cost in rural communities. Daily routines are strongly tied to the available daylight, especially during seasons of intense agricultural work. Summer days stretch activity late. Winter evenings pull households indoors much earlier. The clock matters less than the sun. You can feel that rhythm now. There is still work to finish, but it changes character. Heavy outdoor tasks are mostly done inside. Smaller jobs continue. A garment needs mending. A tool handle must be inspected. Twine can be prepared. Wool may be spun. Food can be arranged for morning. Children can be settled. Someone checks the fire. Someone else closes or secures the doorway. The evening is quieter than the day, but it is not empty. You sit close enough to the hearth to see hands moving in the light. A woman draws thread through cloth. The needle catches the glow for a moment and disappears. An older family member works slowly with a small object in his lap. Perhaps he is repairing something. Perhaps sharpening. Perhaps simply keeping his hands occupied. Conversation moves around the room, not constantly. Silence is allowed to exist here. That may be one of the biggest differences between your world and this one. There is no permanent background stream of recorded music, television, traffic, alerts, messages, or machines. When nobody speaks, you hear the fire, you hear breathing, you hear a spoon touch pottery, you hear the wind push gently against the wall, you hear animals shifting outside. A distant dog barks, then silence returns. Your ears become sensitive very quickly. A strange feature of darkness is that it seems to enlarge sounds. A knock outside would feel more serious now than it did at noon. A rustle near the grain chest becomes suspicious. A horse calling in the distance might carry farther than expected without artificial light. The world beyond the fire becomes difficult to inspect. That uncertainty encourages people to stay close together. Stories naturally belong in such an environment. They do not need to be formal performances. Someone recalls an event from the village. A child asks about a relative. An older person repeats a tale heard years before. News travels orally. Memories travel orally. Warnings, jokes, prayers, gossip, and local knowledge all pass through speech. You do not need to imagine every evening as a dramatic storytelling ceremony around the flames. Most nights are probably more ordinary than that. People are tired, hands are busy, someone wants to sleep. Yet darkness creates time for voices because so many other activities become difficult. A small curiosity hides in the very materials used for lighting. Rushlights are so basic that they rarely survive archaeologically. Yet later written descriptions and traditional practices reveal how important they could be in poorer homes. Something that leaves almost no grand trace in history may have illuminated countless ordinary conversations. The humble objects often vanish first, their usefulness does not. You watch the rushlight bend slightly, a drop of grease forms near the flame. Someone adjusts it before it goes out. There is skill even in managing tiny sources of light. The hearth requires attention too. If you let the fire burn too strongly, fuel disappears quickly if you allow it to die entirely. Morning becomes more difficult. The household therefore reduces it carefully. Large flames give way to glowing embers. Ash can be drawn around them to preserve heat. The goal is not to keep the room brilliantly warm all night. That would consume too much fuel. The goal is to leave enough life in the hearth to make tomorrow easier. The room gradually cools. You pull your wool more tightly around you. This is when the cottage begins to feel smaller again. Darkness removes the far corners. Only the immediate circle of light feels inhabited. You begin to understand why medieval nights encourage an entirely different relationship with time. Hours after sunset are not brightly separated into dinner, entertainment, browsing, and one final unnecessary snack. Activity slows because the environment insists upon it. The body notices. Yawns begin. Children become quieter. Someone stretches. The day's labour has been physical, and sleep is not an abstract wellness goal. It is recovery. Still, nobody necessarily falls asleep the instant darkness arrives. Patterns of medieval sleep are difficult to generalize. Later historical evidence from early modern Europe describes periods of divided sleep, with people waking for a while during the night before returning to rest. But it is uncertain how consistently those patterns should be projected backward into 13th century rural life. Season, workload, age, household crowding, animals, infants, illness, and weather can all interrupt sleep anyway. Your evening may therefore end gradually. Not with a fixed bedtime, with diminishing activity. One task disappears, then another. The rushlight is extinguished. The hearth becomes mostly embers. Faces fade. You can barely see the chest beside you now. Someone crosses the room carefully without knocking into anything. A skill you clearly do not yet possess. Bedding is arranged. Clothing is loosened or removed according to comfort, modesty, and temperature. The dog outside gives one last bark. A child murmurs something you cannot understand. The cottage is almost dark, almost. A red glow remains in the hearth. It pulses faintly whenever air moves through the embers. You lie down and discover that darkness does not make the household disappear. It makes every nearby body more noticeable. A cough, a turn in the bedding, a whispered word, straw shifting beneath someone's weight. The room that felt crowded during the day now feels even more intimate. And you're about to learn that sleeping in a medieval cottage is not simply a matter of closing your eyes. It is a collective activity with blankets, straw, noise, cold feet, restless children, and absolutely no concept of a private bedroom. You lower yourself onto the bedding and immediately discover that medieval sleep begins with negotiation. Not verbal negotiation. Necessarily, spatial negotiation. A shoulder needs room. A child has already claimed more blanket than seems mathematically possible. Someone's feet are too close to your legs. The straw beneath you rustles every time anybody moves, and although the cottage is finally quiet, it is not silent. You hear breathing from the other side of the room, a cough, a soft scrape near the hearth, the faint movement of an animal outside, wind brushing over the thatch. Then somebody turns over, and the entire mattress answers with a dry whisper. Your bed may be a simple pallet filled with straw, chaff, or another plant material, covered by cloth and softened as much as the household can afford, if the family's better off. There may be a wooden bedstead. If not, a raised platform, bench, sack, or mattress placed closer to the floor can serve perfectly well. What matters most is staying dry and warm. A mattress filled with fresh straw is not necessarily torture. In fact, when it is properly packed, it can be surprisingly comfortable. You settle your weight carefully. The surface gives beneath you. For several seconds, you almost approve. Then one stiff stalk finds the exact location between your shoulder blade and spine where maximum irritation can be achieved. There it is. Historical authenticity. Straw bedding needs maintenance. It compresses. It becomes dusty. It can absorb moisture. It may harbour insects. So it can be shaken, aired, replaced, or refreshed when possible. A household with access to clean straw after harvest has an opportunity to renew bedding in ways that make a real difference to comfort. Blankets matter even more. Wool traps warmth efficiently. And in a cold cottage that can mean the difference between unpleasant sleep and truly miserable sleep. Sheets or linen coverings may exist, depending on household means. Textiles represent considerable labour and value, so bedding is treated carefully. A torn blanket is repaired. A worn sheet is reused. Nothing soft is cheap. Sharing a bed solves several problems at once. It saves space. It reduces the number of mattresses needed. Most importantly, it preserves body heat. 2 or 3 people beneath one covering are warmer than one person alone. This is especially useful during winter. It is slightly less charming when somebody has cold feet. You feel one touch your ankle. You resist the urge to relocate to the stable. Children commonly sleep near parents or siblings, and servants, dependents, or relatives may occupy the same room in various arrangements. Exactly who sleeps beside whom depends on age, status, household composition, available furniture, and local custom. The neat modern idea that every person naturally deserves a private bedroom would look extravagant here. Privacy is created socially rather than architecturally. People avert their eyes. They follow habits. They understand when someone is changing clothes or settling into bed. Boundaries exist, but they are negotiated inside shared space. The room cools quickly after the fire dies down. Your face feels the cold first. You pull the covering higher. The roof above you does not contain modern insulation. Walls may block much of the wind, but small gaps remain. Cold air finds them. It always does. The warmest sleeping places are valuable. A position near the hearth may retain heat longer, though sleeping too close to open embers brings obvious danger. A place against an external wall may feel colder. The location of bedding is therefore practical rather than decorative. People learn which corners collect drafts. They know where rain sometimes finds its way through thatch. They know which section of floor remains damp after bad weather. The cottage has its own climate map, and everyone who lives here understands it. One small domestic habit may help considerably. People sometimes sleep wearing part of their clothing, or keep garments close enough to pull over themselves when temperatures fall. The image of everyone dressing in elaborate night clothes before bed belongs to a much wealthier and later world. Your wool cloak can suddenly become additional bedding. Efficiency wins again. You lie still for perhaps 30 seconds. Then something moves near the wall, scratch, pause, scratch again. The cat lifts its head. You become very interested. The mouse becomes very quiet. Nothing happens. Eventually the cat settles. Apparently everyone has agreed to continue negotiations tomorrow. Fleas present a less diplomatic problem. They can live in bedding, clothing, floor material, and animal environments. Lice prefer people more directly. Neither requires an invitation. You may scratch without even being fully awake. Households fight them with washing, combing, airing, replacement of bedding material, and whatever local remedies seem useful. Success is temporary. Perhaps that explains why the fine-toothed comb deserves more respect than many glamorous medieval artifacts. A sword may appear in a museum display. A comb is the object you would probably beg to borrow after 3 nights here. The soundscape changes as everyone settles. People who work physically hard can fall asleep quickly, but exhaustion does not guarantee uninterrupted rest. Infants wake, children dream, animals make noise, storms rattle the roof, a sick person coughs, someone must occasionally check the fire. An urgent bodily need sends somebody toward the door in complete darkness. You hear careful footsteps, a bump, a whispered complaint. So much for moving silently. What medieval people actually considered a normal night's sleep remains difficult to pin down. Later, European sources famously mention patterns in which people sleep for several hours, wake for a quiet interval, then return to bed. That idea has attracted considerable attention, but projecting it neatly onto every rural household in 1271 would be risky. Your sleep is probably governed less by theory than by circumstance. If you are exhausted, you sleep. If the baby cries, you wake. If a cow sounds distressed, someone investigates. If rain begins leaking through the roof, everyone becomes an amateur roofer at an unfortunate hour. Night remains connected to work, Even dreams do not fully separate you from responsibility. You drift towards sleep again. The room smells of straw, wool, smoke, bodies, and the last traces of supper. To modern senses, it is intense. To the people around you, it is simply home. That distinction becomes important. Familiar smells can be comforting. Familiar breathing can be reassuring. The presence of other people may feel restrictive during the day, but at night it also means you're surrounded by warmth and voices you know. There is security in numbers. A strange sound outside is not yours alone to interpret. A sudden illness is noticed. A frightened child reaches another person immediately. In a world without telephones, emergency services, electric alarms, or locked apartment corridors, sleeping together provides practical protection. You begin to understand why solitude could feel less luxurious here than it does to you. Alone means quiet, but alone also means nobody hears when something goes wrong. The wind strengthens outside, thatch shifts softly overhead, a draft slides across your face, you pull the blanket tighter. Someone beside you does exactly the same. Soon the fire will need rebuilding. Soon there will be water to fetch, animals to feed, food to prepare, and fields to face again. But not yet. For a few hours. The entire household lies folded into the same small darkness. Then you imagine this same room when the wind turns colder. The ground freezes, and daylight shrinks until evening seems to arrive almost as soon as the day has begun. Sleep is crowded now. Winter will make it a struggle for warmth. You wake before sunrise and know immediately that winter has changed the cottage. The cold is no longer something outside. It has entered the room. Your breath is faintly visible when you sit up. The blanket feels warm only where your body has trapped heat beneath it. And the moment you lift one edge, cold air slides underneath with shocking efficiency. Nobody lingers in bed for pleasure. The hearth must be revived. Someone crosses the floor carefully, kneels beside the grey remains of last night's fire and begins searching beneath the ash for surviving embers. A dull red point appears, dry tinder is added, a breath, another breath, a fragile flame catches. The entire household seems to watch it as though civilization itself depends upon the outcome. In a way, it does. Winter turns fuel into one of the most important resources you possess. Every piece of wood burned this morning had to be collected, cut, carried, and stored earlier. Some households may supplement firewood with brush, peat, crop residues, or other combustible material depending on local conditions and access rights. You cannot simply burn endlessly because you feel chilly. Fuel has limits. That creates an uncomfortable balancing act. More fire means more warmth. More fire also means faster depletion of the pile. January does not care about your feelings. You hold your hands toward the growing flames while the rest of the cottage remains stubbornly cold. Open hearths warm unevenly, and the building itself loses heat through walls, roof, floor, doorways, and small gaps that seemed insignificant in summer. Now every crack has become a specialist in discomfort. Cold air slips around the doorway. Wind finds a thin weakness in the daub. The floor radiates chill upward. You begin to appreciate clothing indoors. Wool stays on. Head coverings stay useful. Several layers are better than one. Nobody's trying to maintain a modern indoor temperature where people wander comfortably through January wearing a thin shirt. The cottage aims for survivable warmth, not tropical confidence. Winter also brings damp. Rain can soak the yard for days. Snow may melt into mud near the entrance. Wet shoes come inside. Clothing needs drying. Firewood itself becomes troublesome if it has not been stored properly. Damp wood smokes more and burns poorly. The hearth that already irritates your eyes can become even less cooperative. Smoke hangs lower. Someone adjusts the fire. The door opens briefly to improve the air. Cold rushes in. Everyone regrets the solution immediately. The difficulty of medieval winter is not simply low temperature. It is the combination of cold, moisture, limited daylight, food storage, fuel management, animal care, and reduced access to fresh resources. The agricultural calendar slows in some respects. But work does not disappear. Tools need repair. Animals need feeding. Dung needs moving. Firewood must be managed. Grain must be protected. Threshing and other indoor or sheltered tasks may continue. Textile work becomes especially valuable when long evenings restrict outdoor activity. The cottage turns inward. You see evidence of preparation everywhere. Bundles of dried plants, stored grain, onions or other vegetables kept where conditions permit, salted or smoked food, cheese, perhaps dried peas and beans. None of it is accidental. Winter survival begins months before winter. Harvest abundance must be converted into something that lasts. If storage fails, the problem is severe. Mice can damage grain. Moisture can encourage rot. Improperly preserved meat can spoil. A broken container can mean waste. A small household watches its food stores with almost financial intensity. You look toward a chest or bin containing grain. That grain is not merely breakfast. Some may need to become seed. Some may be owed as rent, dues, or other obligations. Some must last until future crops become available. Eating too freely in early winter can create hunger later. This is why medieval food insecurity often follows the calendar rather than appearing evenly across the year. The months before a new harvest can become especially difficult if earlier stores are running low. Winter itself is only part of the problem. Spring can be worse. You suddenly understand why people count sacks, jars, cheeses, and bundles so carefully. There is no supermarket reopening tomorrow morning. A small curiosity emerges from how households manage cold beds. A heated stone, brick, or other warmed object can sometimes be wrapped and placed near bedding in later traditional practice. Much like a primitive hot water bottle. Direct evidence for exactly how often 13th century peasant families use such tricks is elusive. But the basic idea requires little technology and considerable common sense. You glance at the hearth. A warm stone near your feet tonight sounds less ridiculous than it would have yesterday. Animals face their own winter pressures. Cattle and sheep cannot rely indefinitely on lush pasture. Hay and other fodder must have been gathered and stored. A harsh winter consumes reserves quickly if feed becomes scarce. Households may be forced to slaughter animals they would rather keep. That decision affects more than meat. Losing breeding stock or draft animals can damage the following year's economy. A cow is future milk. An ox is future ploughing power. A sheep is future wool. Winter eats tomorrow as well as today. Medieval estate records and later agricultural evidence show how carefully fodder, livestock numbers, and seasonal slaughter can be managed. But reconstructing the exact winter experience of poorer families in 1271 remains difficult. Written records favour landlords and institutions, while the cold nights of ordinary tenants rarely generate detailed documentation. A severe winter may therefore loom large in one local record and vanish almost entirely from another. You're left with scattered evidence and a very physical logic. Cold bodies need calories, animals need fodder, fires need fuel, buildings need maintenance. Everything becomes more expensive in effort. Even water changes. A nearby source may freeze at the edges. Paths become slippery. Buckets feel colder in your hands. Washing becomes less appealing when every wet surface threatens to chill you. Yet routines continue. Hands still need cleaning. Cooking still requires water. Animals still drink. The household does not stop because the weather is rude. Snow, when it comes, transforms the world outside into something beautiful and inconvenient. The roof turns white, hedges soften, fields disappear beneath a smooth surface. Sound seems quieter. Then you step outside. Snow enters your shoe. Beauty becomes less philosophical. Paths must be kept passable. Animals must be reached. Fuel must be brought in. The doorway accumulates wet straw and mud as snow melts from clothing and boots. Inside, the hearth works constantly against everything winter brings through the door. By late afternoon, daylight is already fading. The family gathers closer to the fire than before. Work happens within arm's reach of warmth. Children sit where adults can supervise them. An older relative receives a better position near the hearth, because age makes cold harder to tolerate. You notice how winter compresses the household socially as well as physically. Everyone lives closer. Everyone smells more strongly of smoke and wool. Everyone hears the same wind. Tempers may shorten. Stories may lengthen. The same people who felt crowded in summer now become additional sources of heat. That is the strange winter bargain. You surrender space and gain warmth. Outside, the wind pushes against the wall, the door holds, the timber creaks, the thatch shivers but stays in place. You feel the cold trying to enter through every weakness. Then the fire brightens again. For tonight, at least, the cottage holds. And when winter finally loosens its grip, you might imagine the difficult season is over, but summer has been waiting patiently with flies, heat, spoiled food, exhausting daylight, and a completely different set of complaints. Summer arrives without asking whether you're ready for it. At first, the change feels generous. The doorway can stay open longer. The cold drafts that troubled you in winter lose their power. Clothing becomes lighter where possible, and the fire no longer needs to fight constantly against freezing air. For a few pleasant mornings, you may even believe the cottage has become comfortable. Then the flies arrive. They find the food, they find the animals, they find the damp places. They find you. A constant buzzing settles into the room, especially around anything sweet, fatty, wet, or recently cooked. You wave one away from your face and watch another immediately take its place. Summer solves the cold problem by replacing it with several smaller annoyances that never seem to sleep. The cottage feels different in warm weather. The thatch above you can provide useful insulation against heat, but sunlight still warms the building through the day. Open doors and shutters, if the house has them, help air move through. That is helpful until the airflow brings dust, insects, and the smell of the yard inside. You begin to understand that ventilation in a medieval farmhouse is always negotiating with something unpleasant. Open the house and you get fresh air plus flies. Close it and you get heat plus smoke. Choose your inconvenience. Agricultural work now dominates the rhythm of the household more intensely than ever. Summer is not a season of reclining beneath trees while someone plays a lute. Fields demand attention. Hay must be cut. Weeds must be managed. Livestock must be moved and watched. Tools require constant use and repair. As grain ripens later in the season, the pressure increases further. The long daylight that feels luxurious to you becomes additional working time to everyone around you. A summer morning can begin before the sun fully clears the horizon. People eat quickly, clothing is adjusted, tools are collected, then much of the household disappears outdoors. This is one of the most dependable patterns in medieval rural life. Farming follows season rather than clock, and the busiest periods can demand extraordinary amounts of coordinated labor from entire households and communities. Children contribute where age allows. Adults perform heavier tasks. Older people may help with food preparation, childcare, processing crops, or lighter work close to home. Nobody's waiting for a weekend. The crop has its own calendar. You step into the sunlight and immediately feel the difference from winter. The ground is dry enough to raise dust. Grass hums with insects, birds are louder, the smell of warm earth mixes with manure, vegetation, animals, and smoke drifting from nearby houses. Sweat appears quickly, wool becomes less charming, linen feels far more sensible against the skin. Even then, protection matters. Long garments may still shield skin from sun, scratches, nettles, insects, and rough work. You may envy modern shorts for about 15 minutes, then you walk through a hedge. The medieval wardrobe regains some credibility. Heat creates another problem inside the cottage. Food spoils faster. Milk turns sour quickly. Cooked dishes cannot be left indefinitely. Meat requires particular care without refrigeration. Summer preservation depends heavily on salting, smoking, drying, careful storage, and simply consuming perishable food before it becomes dangerous. Dairy products demonstrate this perfectly. Fresh milk is useful but short-lived. Turning it into cheese or butter extends its life and makes transport and storage easier. What looks like a simple cheese on the table is really a solution to temperature. You slice a piece and notice how firm it is. It exists partly because summer is impatient. Grain is safer when dry, but moisture remains a threat. Stored food must be protected from insects and rodents as well as heat. Containers are checked. Lids are secured. Anything damp needs attention. A sack that becomes wet can create trouble quickly. The cottage is therefore never truly separated from food management. Every corner reminds you of some future meal. Outside, the garden is more generous now. Cabbages, onions, leeks, herbs, peas, beans, or other useful plants may be available depending on local conditions and planting choices. Wild foods can supplement cultivated produce. Berries appear seasonally. Nuts will come later. Herbs can be gathered for cooking, scent, or household remedies. The landscape feels richer than winter. But abundance creates labour of its own. What grows must be harvested. What is harvested must be eaten, sold, dried, stored, brewed, preserved, or processed. Summer gives with one hand and hands you a basket with the other. One small domestic detail becomes especially noticeable in hot weather. Doors may remain open for long periods while people move between yard and house. That means chickens occasionally behave as though architectural boundaries are merely suggestions. A hen crosses the threshold. Someone shoos it out. It returns 5 minutes later with the confidence of a property owner. You begin to suspect that medieval domestic life contains more chicken negotiations than surviving manuscripts admit. Insects are less negotiable. Flies gather around waste. Fleas remain active. Mosquitoes or biting insects may trouble wetter regions. Smoke can help discourage some pests, which gives the annoying hearth another accidental advantage. A little smoke that irritated you in winter may feel almost useful when insects are thick. Almost. The interior also smells stronger in summer. Warmth amplifies everything. Wool, leather, sweat, food, animals, waste, wood smoke, damp corners. A household accustomed to these scents may barely notice what overwhelms your modern nose. Still, people are not indifferent to odour. Spoilage smells dangerous. Stagnant water attracts concern. Dirty bedding is aired. Waste is moved away where possible. The difference lies in expectations and resources, not in a total absence of hygiene. The exact intensity of summer discomfort is one of those questions difficult to reconstruct from surviving evidence. Written records tell you when harvests fail, rents change, or labour is owed far more readily than they tell you how hot a cottage felt on a particular July afternoon. Building experiments suggest that thatch can moderate indoor temperatures surprisingly well, while local design, shade, ventilation, and wall thickness all alter the experience. so perhaps your cottage is less oven-like than imagination suggests. That does not save you from the flies. By late afternoon, people return tired and dusty, tools are set down, water is wanted immediately, faces are washed, shoes are inspected, hands are dirty with soil and plant residue. The cottage shifts back into its evening role, but summer delays darkness. There is still light enough to repair a handle outside, still time to gather something from the garden. Still enough sun for another trip to check animals. Long days stretch work rather than leisure. The household eats later than it might in winter. The meal may include fresher vegetables, perhaps milk products, bread, and whatever else the season provides. You're tired enough that even simple food tastes excellent. That may be summer's greatest trick. It exhausts you until pottage feels like a reward. As evening finally approaches, warm air lingers in the doorway, flies slow. Birds quiet down. The cottage smells of sweat, straw, food, and sun-warmed wood. You sit near the wall and realize that every season has changed the same room into a different place. Winter made it a refuge. Summer makes it a base camp. And beneath both versions lies something even more important than temperature. This is where people are born, fall ill, recover, work, pray, age, argue, care for one another, and sometimes face the ordinary crises that define an entire life. By now, the cottage no longer feels like a simple shelter. It feels like the container for an entire human life. You see this most clearly when the ordinary rhythm of work is interrupted. A child falls sick. An older relative becomes too weak to leave the bedding. A woman nears childbirth. Someone cuts a hand badly enough that fieldwork must stop. The room changes immediately. The same bench used for meals becomes a place to rest. The same hearth used for cooking now heats water. The same cloth used for household work becomes a bandage. The same people who spent yesterday repairing tools or tending animals suddenly become nurses, watchers, helpers, and anxious relatives. There is no separate medical wing. Illness happens where everything else happens. You notice a child lying beneath a blanket near the warmer side of the room. Someone touches the child's forehead. Another person brings water. A few herbs are being prepared nearby. The household knows remedies inherited through experience, local custom, and conversations with neighbours. Some may help, some may do very little. Some may be based on ideas about the body that would sound completely unfamiliar to you. Medieval healing is not one single system. Learned physicians discuss humours, balance, diet, urine, bloodletting, and elaborate theories drawn from ancient authorities. But your farming household is far more likely to begin with practical domestic treatment. Rest, warmth, food if the patient can eat, herbal preparations, cleaning a wound, prayer, advice from someone in the village known to have experience with illness, a local healer, midwife, priest, barber, or other knowledgeable person may become important depending on the problem. The boundary between medicine, household wisdom, and belief is not neatly drawn, nor would the people around you expect it to be. If a herb soothes pain and a prayer brings reassurance, both have value in different ways. You watch a woman crush plant material in a small vessel. Perhaps it is intended for a poultice, perhaps for a drink, perhaps simply because someone older once said it helped. That transmission of knowledge matters enormously in a world where most rural people cannot consult printed manuals. You learn by watching, by remembering, by being corrected, by surviving enough winters to recognize what usually works. One overlooked feature of medieval domestic medicine is precisely how much responsibility rests on ordinary households before any specialist becomes involved. Much of healthcare begins at home because home is where the patient already is. Childbirth makes that reality even clearer. If a woman gives birth in this cottage, the room becomes intensely private and communal at the same time. Men may be excluded from the immediate birth space depending on custom and circumstance, while female relatives, neighbours, and an experienced midwife assist. Water is heated, cloths are prepared, the bed or another suitable area is arranged, prayers may be spoken, advice comes rapidly, everyone else learns to stay out of the way. You have finally found an activity in which standing awkwardly near the wall is not merely inconvenient but actively discouraged. Childbirth carries serious risk for both mother and baby, yet it is also familiar. Pregnancy is not treated as a mysterious rare event. Families see births repeatedly across generations. Experienced women accumulate practical knowledge about labour, infant care, feeding, and recovery. How standardised midwifery practice is among poorer rural communities in 1271 remains hard to establish because the surviving records speak far more clearly about elite households and later periods than about individual village births. Still, women assisting women in childbirth is deeply rooted in medieval society. The cottage also raises children after they arrive. Infants sleep close to adults. Young children are watched while other work continues. Nobody creates a perfectly separate nursery protected from domestic labour. A mother may feed a baby while preparing food. An older sibling may watch a toddler. A grandmother may contribute childcare while younger adults work outside. Childhood is integrated into the working household from the beginning. This does not mean children are treated simply as miniature adults. Age matters. Strength matters, ability matters, but responsibilities arrive gradually. A small child can gather sticks, an older one can watch geese, another can carry water, help in the garden, scare birds from crops, or perform countless minor tasks that free adults for heavier work. The household teaches through participation. You learn because somebody gives you something small to do, then slightly more, then more again. Home production follows the same pattern. In one corner, wool may be spun. Elsewhere, cloth is mended. Food is processed. Cheese may be made. Ale may be brewed. Flax may be worked. Baskets repaired. Handles replaced. Cord twisted. Leather patched. The cottage does not merely consume goods. It manufactures, repairs, transforms, and preserves them. This domestic production is one reason medieval rural households cannot be understood simply by looking at field work. The field produces grain. The cottage turns grain into meals. Sheep produce wool. Hands inside the cottage turn wool into thread. A worn object returns indoors and becomes useful again. The economic life of the farm flows continuously through the doorway. Religion flows through it too. You may see a small cross, a simple devotional object, or nothing permanent at all, but prayer remains woven into daily life. The parish church structures the calendar through feast days, fasting periods, baptisms, marriages, confession, funerals, and weekly worship. Christian belief provides explanations, obligations, comfort, and fear. People pray during sickness. They bless meals. They remember saints. They worry about sin. They think about death more openly than many modern households do because death is more visible. An elderly relative may remain within the family home until the end of life. A sick neighbour may be visited. A dead body may be prepared within a domestic setting before burial. Yet the cottage is not permanently gloomy. Familiarity with mortality does not prevent laughter. Children still misbehave. Someone still tells a joke while mending a shoe. A neighbour still arrives with gossip. A pot still boils over at the worst possible moment. Life insists on remaining ordinary. There is a subtle detail in medieval religious practice that reveals how thoroughly sacred and domestic life overlap. Small blessings, protective objects, remembered prayers, and local customs can sit comfortably beside formal church teaching. Even when clergy might disapprove of particular folk practices, a sprig, charm, spoken phrase, or marked doorway may offer emotional reassurance. Whether such customs should be called superstition, folk religion, or ordinary devotion depends largely on which historian you ask. To the family using them, the distinction may matter far less. Aging changes your place in the room as surely as childhood does. If your body weakens, you may no longer plough or carry heavy loads, but knowledge has value. You know when to sow, how to recognize changing weather, which cow behaves strangely before illness, how much salt a particular preservation method requires, which neighbour can be trusted, where the boundary stone lies beneath summer grass. An older person can remain useful even when strength fades. That usefulness is important in a household where every pair of hands matters. Of course, not every elderly person enjoys secure care. Poverty, widowhood, lack of children, family conflict, and dependence can make old age precarious. Manorial records occasionally reveal agreements in which older people surrender land or property in exchange for food, lodging, clothing, or support from younger relatives. Such arrangements remind you that family care can be affectionate and contractual at the same time. The cottage is both home and survival system. By evening, the sick child is sleeping. The hearth burns quietly. Someone spins thread. Someone else repairs a tool. A prayer is spoken almost under the breath. Nothing dramatic happens, and that may be the point. Birth, illness, work, faith, aging, and care do not arrive as separate chapters. They overlap inside the same room. You look around at the patched walls, blackened rafters, worn furniture, bedding, tools, and familiar faces. After nearly a year here, the cottage no longer seems merely cramped. It has become a place dense with memory, and before you leave it, there is one final question to consider. Whether a home this uncomfortable, smoky, crowded, and fragile could still feel completely safe, familiar, and deeply yours. You stand near the doorway again, almost where you stood when you first entered the cottage, and the room looks different now. Nothing has changed. The walls are still rough. Smoke has darkened the rafters. The floor is still packed earth beneath your feet. A patched garment hangs from a peg. A wooden bowl waits near the hearth. Someone has left a stool slightly crooked beside the wall. The same small noises continue around you. A pot settles over the fire. A chicken complains outside. Wind brushes through the thatch. Yet the cottage no longer seems simple. You have learned to see the labour hidden inside it. That wall is not just mud. Someone cut the timber. Someone gathered branches. Someone mixed clay and straw. Someone pressed the daub into the woven frame and returned later to repair the cracks. The roof above you contains another season of work. Plants had to be cut, bundled, dried, carried, layered carefully enough to keep rain from dripping onto the bedding below. Even shelter begins in the landscape. You look toward the hearth. For months, it has behaved like another member of the household, demanding, useful, occasionally irritating, always hungry. It cooks the pottage, warms cold hands, dries damp clothing, lights winter evenings, preserves food, blackens ceilings, stings your eyes, and when everyone gathers beside it after darkness falls, it gives the household a centre. In 1271, a rural home is rarely separated cleanly into the specialised rooms familiar to you. Kitchen, workshop, bedroom, storeroom, nursery, and sitting room overlap. That is not merely a consequence of poverty. It reflects a household economy in which domestic life and production are tightly connected. The cottage works because everything shares space, people, tools, food, clothing, bedding, sometimes animals, always work. You think about breakfast. bread broken into pieces, pottage lifted from the communal pot, ale or water, perhaps cheese, vegetables, eggs when available, meat on summer occasions, but certainly not every day. The meals once appeared monotonous. Now you understand how much uncertainty hides behind them. A loaf represents weather, seed, soil, labour, milling, fuel, and storage. A bowl of peas can represent careful preservation through winter. A piece of bacon represents an animal fed for months. People living close to subsistence do not casually waste what required so much effort to produce. The same principle applies to clothing. You notice the patch on the sleeve again. Once, it looked shabby. Now it looks sensible. Fabric is too expensive in labour to discard casually. A garment may outlive its first wearer, then its second. Eventually it becomes patching material, wrapping, cleaning cloth, or something else useful. Objects rarely have a single life. The cottage trains you to see value differently. You possess less. You repair more. You remember where everything came from. And because people possess fewer objects, individual possessions can carry memories for years. A chest may have belonged to a parent. A knife may pass through generations. A blanket may contain repaired sections sewn by several different hands. Historians can sometimes identify such household goods through inventories and archaeology, but the emotional meaning attached to them mostly disappears. A broken pottery fragment tells you that a vessel existed. It cannot tell you whether a child once hated eating from it. A post hole shows where a wall stood. It cannot tell you where a family gathered when someone told a particularly good story. This is where reconstruction reaches its limit. Archaeology can reveal structure. Documents can reveal rents, land, dues, possessions, and disputes. But ordinary affection leaves very poor paperwork. You have to infer it from human behaviour, and human behaviour is everywhere in the room. Someone keeps an older relative closer to the fire. A child receives the warmer side of a blanket. Food is divided. Shoes are repaired for another season. A sick person is watched through the night. These are small actions. They rarely enter chronicles, yet they are part of medieval history just as surely as kings and battles. A less obvious feature of home is familiarity with danger. You know which part of the roof leaks, which floorboard, if you have one, shifts under weight, which corner attracts mice, which animal dislikes being approached from behind, which crack admits the worst winter draft. The imperfections become landmarks. You learn them so thoroughly that another cottage, perhaps slightly better built, could initially feel less comfortable simply because it is unfamiliar. That is one of the strange qualities of home. Comfort and familiarity are not identical. You can live somewhere uncomfortable and still feel safe there because you understand it completely. Your household knows the sounds of this building. A timber creaking in wind is ordinary. A different crack may wake someone immediately. A dog barking once means little. A certain pattern of barking means someone is approaching. Experience transforms noise into information. The cottage speaks a language its inhabitants understand. Even smells become part of that familiarity. Smoke, wool, bread, damp earth, stored onions, animals, leather, herbs, human bodies, to you. Some of these smells seemed overpowering when you arrived. Now they identify the place. Medieval people probably experienced domestic scent differently, not because their noses function differently, but because expectation is learned. What is familiar fades into the background. What changes suddenly attracts attention. Spoiled food, unusual smoke, sickness, a dead animal. These differences matter more than an abstract standard of freshness. Outside, the seasons continue turning. You remember winter pressing cold through the walls. You remember the household clustering near the fire. Then summer opened the doorway and filled the room with heat. Flies, dust, and the promise of harvest. Every season exposed different weaknesses. Every season also offered different resources. The cottage survived because its inhabitants adapted constantly. No single construction trick made it secure. No single food kept everyone alive. No single person performed all the necessary work. Survival came from accumulation. Hundreds of small decisions: repair the wall, save the embers, dry the grain, patch the shoe, watch the child, feed the pig, store the hay, fetch the water. Do it again tomorrow. There is no dramatic moment when you suddenly conquer medieval life. You simply become better at repeating it, and perhaps that is what home means most strongly here. It is repetition made familiar. The same doorway every morning, the same hearth, the same voices, the same bowl, the same path toward the fields, the same stars appearing above the roof after sunset. The world beyond the village may contain royal disputes, wars, monasteries, merchants, courts, and distant cities. Most of them barely touch your thoughts tonight. Your world is smaller, but small does not mean insignificant. For the family inside these walls, this cottage is the center of everything. The fire has burned lower now. The room softens around you as the last orange light settles into the hearth. There is nothing more you need to inspect. No wall to test. No bowl to lift. No muddy path waiting for you tonight. You can simply remain where you are for a little while. Listen to the quiet. The wind passes gently across the thatch, and the roof answers with the faintest rustle. Someone shifts beneath a wool blanket, far outside. An animal moves in the darkness and becomes still again. The cottage is no palace. It has no painted ceiling, no glass windows shining with candlelight, no private chamber waiting behind a carved door. It is rough, smoky, crowded, and imperfect. Yet beneath this roof, people have eaten when they were hungry, warmed themselves when they were cold, cared for children, tended the sick, repaired what was broken, and watched the seasons pass one familiar day at a time. The walls feel warmer now, perhaps not because the fire has grown stronger, perhaps because you finally understand what they contain: memory, routine, work, voices, the small security of knowing where you belong when darkness comes. Let the cottage fade gradually around you. The hearth becomes a red glow. Then only a few embers, the outlines of the chest, the bench, and the hanging clothes disappear. Even the sounds become softer. Your breathing slows. The year 1271 drifts farther away. The fields outside settle beneath the night. The animals are quiet. The doorway is closed, and beneath the old thatched roof, surrounded by the faint smell of smoke and straw, there is nothing left to do but rest. Sweet dreams.